Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my Anthurium collection video. Part 1 was all of my Anthuriums growing in greenhouse conditions in high humidity, like my tent, exos, propagation domes, and this one is all my Anthuriums growing in ambient conditions. So they're going to be bigger, kind of, on average, and they're also kind of suffering a little bit from spider mites. The overarching theme of this video is going to be some ripping of leaves, some speckling of spider mites. That's kind of the reality here. I've been dealing with spider bites for like, I don't know, 2 years. It's been better these days. I've been like a little bit more on top of things with beneficial predatory mites, but also it's just like they're unstoppable. But I get a lot of questions, and I see a lot of questions in general in the community about how to grow anthuriums in ambient conditions and like what are the best ways. And I feel like maybe this could be helpful for some people. You can learn from my failures. I don't think this video is going to be nearly as long as the first one. So the majority of them are living here and here. And I would say if push came to shove and I had to get rid of my tent, I had to get rid of my exos for whatever reason, I had to downsize, I don't know, like if something happened and everything had to change, I could probably grow all but 2 of my anthuriums in ambient conditions. They just wouldn't be as nice. You'll get like little holes every now and then. By the way, the only 2 species that I grow that cannot grow in ambient conditions is my splendidum. Well, a splendidum that was forced on me, and my Anthurium debile. I feel like I have a lot to say about the pros and cons of growing in high humidity and ambient conditions. And for me, I'm in Canada, but I'm like on the coast. So I'm in Vancouver, so the humidity isn't quite as dry, or the humidity isn't quite as low as other parts of Canada. I would say it's probably more consistent throughout the year. So it's not like in Ontario or Montreal where it gets like really humid in the summer and it's like super dry in the winter. It's a little bit more moderate here. And so in the winter, of course, it's drier. It's ranging around 30% humidity because the heaters are on, but in the summer it's kind of around 40-50% just ambient. So it's not extremely low humidity here, but it's definitely much lower than my tent, for example. So I'm kind of on a time crunch today, so we're gonna just get right into it. Okay, so I want to start off with my probably, is it my favorite? It's like definitely top 3 favorite anthuriums of all time. And I'm so glad I'm filming this video today because this emergent leaf, this is the stage where I love it the most. The colors are so magnificent. This is my Anthurium King of Spades. I mean, look at that new leaf. It has spider mites. This thing has spider mites. I would say the damage isn't so bad, but I can definitely see mites on here. And actually, as a side note, after I finish filming today, I'm going to take my Captain Jack spray. This shelf back here is gonna get doused. I don't want to keep using it over and over and over again because the spider mites will get resistant to it. But the thing I like about Captain Jack's is that it doesn't damage emergent leaves. So I can spray on something like super fresh, it will not get burned. And I've actually been spraying Captain Jack's with the lights on without rinsing it off. No damage whatsoever from the Captain Jack's. I would say Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew, that's the one I'm using. It's not that strong. That's probably why it doesn't damage the emergent leaves. But it also doesn't just wipe everything out. So I have been slacking a little bit on that department, but it is part of my to-do list today to just spray every single thing, front and back, petioles, inflows, everything with Captain Jack. So anyways, this plant I got, I think it was like early 2021, late 2020. I don't really remember. I'll link the seller in the description. His name is Randy. His handle is Ardian Plants. His prices are on the higher side for Indonesian sellers, but his quality is really good and he's just a nice guy. I don't really know what else to say. Like, we've always had good experiences with him and I trust him. I just really love this specimen so much because the veins are so spidery. It doesn't have a lot of the bleeding. It just has like the really clean veins. There's a little bit of bleeding right in the sinus. The new leaves are so red. I think with higher light, this one gets a little bit more vibrant, and this thing grows so slowly. I think on average, I get like 2 leaves a year. I'll be really lucky if I get 3. And I recently chopped it. The top cuttings always make it. You can see there's like some healthy roots here. It had quite a small root system when I cut it, and then immediately after it started rooting, it put out a flower and it put out this leaf. But mid and bottom cuttings, I don't have a great track record of getting successful propagations from it. So a lot of them will just mush. And also the internodes are really tight on this, so it's really hard to get many cuttings out of it. It grows slow, so I probably won't be cutting this for at least a year, maybe 2 years. I just want to get it bigger. I don't want to use it as a mother plant for breeding, but if it gets really mature and I feel like it can support something, I'll just assume that I'm not going to get very many berries out of it. But I love King of Spades hybrids. So the King of Spades is a hybrid. I would guess that it's a complex hybrid of like mutated crystallinums, magnificum, bred over many generations. I believe Haji Uli doesn't even know what exactly it is, but one thing I will say about King of Spades is that its characteristics are quite stable in that offspring of King of Spades always kind of have that King of Spades look. They're always kind of round. They always kind of have this like spidery venation pattern where it kind of like comes out really horizontally and then like drops down. They'll often have really nice reds in it. So this is, to me, I feel like quite a stable cultivar. It's such a great parent in breeding, except that as a mother plant, it won't produce a lot of berries. I don't think I've ever seen anyone report that they've had like a huge yield off their King of Spades. But yeah, I just wanted to start with this one because it's like, I cannot tell you how much I love this plant. It's like one of my favorite plants in my entire collection. It's everything I love in an anthurium. It's fat, it's round, it's got great colors, got great veins, and it takes quite a long time actually for it to fully harden off to just like green on green. This leaf has probably been hardened off for over 6 months, maybe longer. At least 6 months, I would say. And it's got really super thick udon roots and it can take some underwatering. It will take up water quite quickly. I find like it drinks quite a lot, but if it dries out a little bit, it's not going to immediately start crisping. I think this is a combination of letting it get completely dry and also it starting to flower. I also think this leaf looking kind of weird and like wonky is from it starting to flower. So this leaf was forming at the same time as its first flower. This leaf looks a little bit better, I will say, but it is quite small because I keep cutting it and I need to stop. Okay, so last video I showed at the very end, a lot of you might not even have made it to the end of that video because it was kind of long. I showed a little batch of seedlings that me and Charmaine did. So the mother plant was her Brielle, and then the pollen parent was my black crystallinum, which I didn't show in that video because it was growing in ambient conditions, but also I haven't shown it in a long time because it has been struggling. It's honestly, like, to me, a beautiful, beautiful dark crystallinum, and I love crystallinums so much. I think as one of these like classic pure species go, because like a lot of hybrids, I believe, are being sold as crystallinum, and you know, but anyways, I got this from Tropicals in 2020, I think. This is what it looked like then. It was so black and the veins are so crisp and so bright sparkling silver. I was in love and I grew it in my tent for a while, but as crystallinums go, it grows kind of like a helicopter. The petioles get really long, so it wouldn't fit in there. So I grew it outside in ambient conditions in pond. So I was growing it in like a self-watering vessel. It had that indicator, but that indicator would break all the time unbeknownst to me. I didn't know that they would just kind of get stuck in that position where it shows that it has water, but it's actually like bone dry. So a lot of the roots dried out. It got really sad. So eventually I moved it straight into tree fern soil. And this is the first leaf it grew. Like I could see the I could see the beauty in it. No, but really, like before it started to rip itself into pieces, I saw the venation pattern on it and I was like, oh, that's really promising, because I hadn't had a nice leaf grow on it in over a year. I kind of forgot what it looked like in a way. And I recently chopped off its old 2 leaves because I just couldn't stand looking at the crispy edges anymore from it being super dry. But this was grown when it didn't have a lot of roots, so I had to remove a lot of the dried out roots when I moved it to tree fern soil. This is grown with very little roots. The plant couldn't take up enough water to form properly. It has since grown a bunch of nice healthy roots. It's not root bound by any means, but this leaf is the latest leaf to come out. And I'm just reminded of why I love this plant so much, and I refused to sell it even when it was really ugly. I probably could have given it away for free, but I was determined to glow this back up. Once this leaf is fully expanded, I'm gonna cut this off. We're gonna put this ugly episode behind us. And I think the main reason why it's growing so much better now, obviously it has a better root system, but because the tree fern soil doesn't dry out quite as dramatically as the pond, I think I'm just kind of done with self-watering pots in general. I'm just kind of doing my own self-watering setup with having a leca layer at the bottom and just keeping a reservoir on plants. But the concept is kind of the same. I'm just not relying on indicators because I just don't trust them after that. The one that I was using was the Elho brand self-watering pots. But anyway, this one has like insane veins. There's so many veins. Is that not the veiniest crystallinum you ever did see? This is definitely veinier than previous leaves I've had on it, but I kind of just attribute that to it getting more mature. So I wish that this was a little bit more expanded by the time I showed this to you. I'll definitely show you updates. I'm really hoping it doesn't show up with like spider mite speckles. Actually, in saying that, I see some right now. There's some faint speckling right down at the bottom. But you know what? Hopefully it's like subtle enough that I can kind of look past it. I'll show you plants later that is like so speckly that you can't not see it. But sometimes it's subtle enough you can kind of like not see it at a distance. So anyway, I love crystallinums. I'm just like pushing for like a resurgence of love for straight up crystallinum, not hybridized with anything, just straight crystallinum with really clean, intensely sparkling venation. They can get really big and they can just be like this show-stopping piece in a room just on its own. For anyone who doesn't like super long petioles and just like wide-reaching growth patterns, maybe it's not for you, or maybe you're gonna have to like cut off every leaf and always just keep like one or two at a time. It's not a super easy anthurium. I think, you know, case in point, it will not grow perfect leaves. It won't grow super fast if it's not like kind of optimal in the root department, but I think it's so great for beginners to get into because they're a pretty approachable plant to get. I think you can learn everything you need to learn about anthurium care through crystallinum. It's not a walk in the park. You'll have some challenges here and there, but you're not breaking the bank in order to do it. So anyway, all that to say, this is the Poland parent to that hybrid we did, and I'm glad to finally be able to show you the actual parent plant. There's a couple of imports that I'm acclimating in ambient conditions right now. So typically with imports, I will acclimate them either in a bin or in my tent if I trust the source that it came from, that it doesn't have pests, because pests can sneak through the phytosanitary process. But every now and then, I won't have space anywhere, and when these plants came in, my tent was at full capacity and I had like 2 bins full of plants in this room. So I was like, they're just gonna have to live outside. So the first one is my only Besier Anthurium. Besier Anthurium is so variable, and I think the first time I ordered it, it was off an order form. I'm pretty sure. I'm 99% sure. At that time, I think it was like 2021-ish. Whenever it was first introduced by Tropicals or Ecoregenera, I don't even really remember where I ordered it from. I think it was Tropicals. But yeah, at that time I didn't know how variable they were. So I didn't know that I was looking for like a specific type of Besier Anthurium, like a specific look. So I just wasn't hugely in love with the one I had. So I chopped it into pieces and then grew them out a little bit and then sold them. So this one I got like maybe a month ago. Lauren had imported a whole bunch to the shop and this was one of them. And I was like, ooh, before we sell it, maybe I'm gonna just snipe it, because I thought these little ears were really cute. The way they kind of turn in towards each other. It's kind of got like an Ace of Spades shape in general, except the lobes are like teeny tiny and kind of narrow on top. I thought this had good potential because every leaf is quite round and they do that little curving in thing. I think everybody wants the one that has a flat sinus, which is like a 1 in a million. So a close second for me is this kind of almond shape. And so I got this into my tree fern soil mix, the same potting situation as I always do, and it's been rooting so happily in it. I find Besier Anthurium is not the easiest anthurium in that it doesn't really grow well for me in a wide variety of substrates. So I think I've only tried to grow them either in just straight pond, possibly tree fern and tree fern soil. And tree fern soil has definitely worked the best for me. I think Besier Anthurium is kind of like Rockweenum in that it likes to be quite damp all the time. So it really doesn't do well with any sort of wet dry cycle. So I do think tree fern soil is the right call for at least me. And I just have to be really careful not to let it dry out because it will really show it. I mean, these leaves are kind of showing it as well. This is kind of what happens when I acclimate anthuriums in ambient conditions. But it has pushed a leaf and we'll see how that forms. I think the root system is pretty healthy. So as long as I keep on top of the watering, it should, in theory, form okay without ripping itself into pieces. The second one I'm acclimating right now is this HU or King of Spades red crystallinum. I got this also from the same seller I got my King of Spades from. So I ordered 2 from him. I'm acclimating one in my tent and this one outside. This one just seemed quite a lot perkier than the other one. The other one seemed a little bit more soft in the leaves, so I thought this one could survive out here. So far, I don't see any roots, but I don't see any decline either. Maybe this. This is the lowest down leaf, so I'm not concerned about that. I really like all these little electric flecks on this, and I think overall it's a pretty dark specimen, which usually when I order stuff from Indonesia, it will get darker in my care because the light isn't as strong as like growing in, they will often grow in these like shaded grow houses, but it's going to be a lot stronger sunlight than what they're getting in here. So hopefully it can get even darker than this in my care. Okay, I figured I'm going to do all of my Lux hybrids all at once. Well, not all of them. All the ones growing in ambient conditions. This one is quote unquote Vag Lux. So the mother plant was a plant that Anna at the shop called Vag because at the back of the leaf, it doesn't have it on this plant, but it kind of half fused and it produced like essentially labia. So she nicknamed it Vag, and now Vag is just like the name that we call it. Vag Lux is quite a fun one because all the emergent leaves, they have really nice kind of dusty, pastel-y, kind of pinky emergent leaves. This one is showing really green in my viewfinder, but in real life and under those lights, it's kind of like a bronzy beige. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now and it's very brown toned, but it's showing up really green in the viewfinder. This one has been responding really well to boat mode. So when I put it into this pot, it had none of these leaves. It was like this big. That was the biggest leaf on it. I got it out of a coffee cup. It was like a 16-ounce coffee cup. Put it into this pot. This was the first leaf that grew out. Look how dark it is. It hardened off super black. It's right under grow lights. It's not getting burned. Then this leaf grew. It's a little bit of a size up. It got a little bit bent here, but also really dark. It kind of looks like the Easter Island faces. And then this leaf is still kind of floppy. It's still expanding a little bit. It's ready for a repot. It's in tree fern soil. It can probably go into an 8 or 9 inch pot. Not that I have a 9-inch pot. 8-inch pot. Do I have room for an 8-inch pot? That's another story. So after this, I don't expect it to continue sizing up. It's gonna probably stay, I mean, it will probably still grow, but the leaves aren't going to be continuously sizing up anymore. Do I want it to continue sizing up? I'm not really sure because I don't have space for all my plants to be like sizing up dramatically with every leaf. So that's definitely something you can do if you want to slow your Anthurium down. Just let it be a little bit root bound. I mean, at the very least, if there's a lot of stem above the substrate, you can just make a little collar for it and just fill it up with substrate. So essentially you're giving it more vertical substrate, but you're letting these roots be on the tighter side so that when you do go to chop it, then you'll have some roots up top as well. This one is Crystallinum Lux. This is from Amanda, and she kind of introduced luxuriance hybrids first to the community. This is like the first one I ever got from her. And a couple of weeks ago, I said I was going to repot it. And guess what? I actually did it. So I've transitioned this from pond, no drainage, to tree fern soil with drainage. It was pretty root bound in there. It has started to root a little bit. So this is probably like 2 weeks of root growth. Not a ton, but I don't see decline. It did try to flower, but the flower never emerged. It just kind of died off in the sheath. So hopefully with this leaf, it'll be able to push out a flower and I'll be able to cross it. Ideally, I want to do it with my Crystallinum Black. It is also pushing another leaf. So I think it's doing good. I think with Lux hybrids, my biggest challenge is getting edema on the leaves. They just show really kind of dramatically with Lux hybrids. They tend to do better in soil in general, I feel like, the Luxurians and Lux hybrids, because I think with more consistent moisture in the substrate, it doesn't dry out and get wet and dry out. It's like more stable. So the edema doesn't show up as much, because I actually do think that if your plant is used to drying out and getting water and then drying out and getting water, if you move it to a substrate that doesn't have that sharp dry wet cycle, it will get pretty bad edema. So if you're like a chronic underwater and you're just suddenly like, I vow to be on top of my watering and I'm going to water it before it fully dries out, and then you start to water plants really deeply, you can expect that some of them are going to show edema. Whether or not it actually translates to damage and rupture cells like this, I think it will depend on the plant. So this one showed up after I got it to tree and soil, but I'm not too fussed about it. I know it will grow another nice leaf, and I'm just gonna let it acclimate to this more wet substrate. I just realized I've been filming for so long and we got so much left to go, and Jing's on her way here, so I need to speed up. This one is one of my favorite Lux hybrids. This is from Amanda. So this is Lux, Ralph Lynham, Fort Sherman. I am on a mission to grow mine as dark as hers. If you ever get plants from Amanda, one thing you will notice is that she has like beautifully dark plants. She really has her lighting dialed in, that her plants are like not getting a crazy amount of light. They stay super black. And her specimens from this batch, because I got this as seeds, I think it was like a year and a half ago, and I've never been able to achieve the blackness that she has. I know that it's possible because all of her specimens are super like oily black. They just look like they're covered in tar. It's so pretty. It have like a purple shift. Mine always look a little bit more green like this. It definitely does have the pap elongation and stuff, but I keep trying to push it back away from the light more and more, and just to see how low of a light I need to grow it in order to get really dark leaves without it kind of like reaching like crazy towards the light. Because like if you get your plant under too low of light, what will happen is that they're going to start reaching for the light. So I'm just trying to walk that fine line. I haven't found the right light yet for it to get really dark leaves. But yeah, this one is in desperate need for a repot. It is on my to-do list for this week. But this one is like probably the biggest leaf I've grown, and this is after a chop. But you can see how much stem is above the substrate, so we need to address this week. A couple of videos ago, at the same time I said I was going to repot that Crystal Lux, I also said I was going to repot my Luxurians, my straight up pure Luxurians, and I finally did. It also went from pond to tree fern soil. I've had this for so long, also since before Tropicals and Epigenera was selling Lux. I kind of paid an arm and a leg for a very small propagation of it. The leaves were like this big, but I've had it for so long that it should be huge by now. And it's not that I want it to be humongous. I just don't think that this is like super healthy. So I figured it's going to be happier in tree fern soil. The roots look fine, but I don't see new root growth. But the existing roots on the plant are still there. It does seem to be still pushing that one flower. It doesn't look like it's like browning at the tip, so I think it might still push it out. I don't plan on doing anything with it. I don't need to add to the Lux hybrid conversation, I don't think. I think there's enough out there. But other than that, not much to report. I think it's going to do better in soil versus pond. Because I'm growing it at ambient conditions and these plants dry out a little faster than my greenhouse plants, I don't want it to have that dry wet cycle that it's going to ruin leaves, because I find Luxurians, when you get edema on it, it will show up as damage, like as a yellow halo all around the leaves. So I'm just gonna try to keep the moisture as constant as possible for it. As I was putting it back, I kind of noticed it on the older leaf. So you see here, I find that edema damage will start like this and eventually it will overtake the whole leaf. Okay, so lately I've been kind of getting rid of some of my mother plants because they're getting too big. So I had some biggish plants here that I gave one to Jing, I gave one to Charmaine. I'm just trying to make space because these plants are getting a little bit too big. So I really have to like start editing what I truly love and only keep that. So I don't have as many forgetti left than I used to, but the one plant, the one forgetti that is silvery that I kept is my favorite one, which is this one. It's been struggling with spider mites, but I love it just the same. This has historically been a plant for me where it gets blacker with more light. So I discovered this when I started using mother lights, and the mother lights are 32 watts, very strong. It was pointing directly at this plant and it just kept getting blacker and blacker. Like, look how black it is. Look how black it is compared to my hair. It's like the same color. So I think the thing I love about this plant the most is how pinstripe that silver is and the texture. Do you see that like elephant skin texture? I love velvet anthuriums when it has that elephant skin texture. This is a new leaf. It got a little bit dinged up coming out of the sheath, but you can also see the texture on it. It just has that like pebbly grain. It's pretty damage free up top, but there's a little bit of spider mite damage down here at the bottom. This one also does, I know it's not showing up really well on camera, but it does do this like brownish emergent leaf, which I think is so pretty. So I've had this far too long for it to be this small, but it's definitely one of my favorite forgetti in my whole collection. It's so dark. Speaking of forgetti and speaking of spider mite damage, oh my gosh, it looks so bad. This is Topogetti. Let me show you the nicer leaf first. This is the specimen that I decided to keep because it's so weird. So the mother plant is tofu. I'm gonna put tofu here. This is Jing's plant. I have tofu right now. She's right here. Tofu is the mother plant and the pollen parent was my dark forgetti. This thing is so wild. It looks so reptilian. It's so vibrant. It's got this like viper green, a really pink sinus, and this stays for so long. This leaf has been fully hardened for many months now. On the older leaves, look how pink that sinus is. The next leaf from that, I'm trying not to show you this disgusting leaf yet. Really pink sinus. It's starting to fully fuse its sinus, but it has a little bit of a wave. Like it's like, do I want to fuse it? Do I want to have lobes? So there's that. And then the newest leaf got absolutely annihilated by spider mites. I probably should just cut it off. Oh my gosh, it's flowering. Well, isn't that something? This leaf has a flower emerging. Maybe I won't cut it off. Do I want to cut it off? It would be interesting to self it and see what these offspring look like, because every single specimen in that very small batch of tofugettii looks like it came from a different set of parents. I honestly love my specimen, especially when this leaf grew. I got it, I had upsized the pot, and so the first leaf was a pretty dramatic upsize. And seeing the sinus start to fuse, because it's fused up to here, I was so in awe of it because it's like a forgetti, but it's so narrow. So I don't know what it's going to end up looking like. I probably won't self it until it starts to get a lot bigger than this. This one actually needs water. It's in tree fern soil. I will definitely be drowning this in Captain Jack's after I film, because I've been spraying it pretty consistently. I would say every 5 days or so. I just don't know if any spider mites are left on the plant. This is probably a good candidate for actually just taking into the shower and just rinsing every leaf off. Since it doesn't have an emergent leaf to ruin, I could also get like some Castile soap and just soap up all the leaves and rinse everything really thoroughly, because this is probably the plant that has the worst spider mite damage in everything you're going to see today. Okay, this plant also needs water. Dead inflow. I really tried to self it. I have tried 3 times to pollinate this plant. Does not want to take. This is Anthurium Wendlingeri. This was my first Wendlingeri. I had this, I guess I don't need the saucer because it's so dry. I've had this since, I want to say 2020. Maybe it was like the cusp of 2020 to 2021. And I grew it from a little seedling to this size. Honestly, it probably could be a lot bigger. But I can tell you, this is one of the first plants I started growing in tree fern soil. And just seeing how fast the roots were, I will say, I think the reason why it didn't grow for so long, I just chalked it up to be like a plant that never grows. Oh, like this plant is like so finicky. It's just like such a slow growing plant, but it's worth it because it's such a great plant. I'm pretty sure it was because I was growing it in like a very cocoa husk mix. And one thing about cocoa is that it will just absorb all the nutrients in your substrate if you don't buffer it. So I actually think that Wendlingeri being quite a heavy feeder in my experience, because if you don't feed it and water it very consistently, you'll have warped leaves like this. This is not that bad. But sometimes Wendley leaves will basically like curl, almost like the inflow, if you let it dry out, if you don't feed it enough while it's growing a leaf. So in order to get something like kind of flat like this, you have to make sure you stay on top of the watering. But in thinking back, I'm pretty sure because I was growing it in cocoa, it just didn't have the food to actually grow. And ever since I got it into a cocoa-less tree fern soil substrate, it has been growing way bigger leaves. It's been flowering kind of nonstop. That might be because of the TPS one, I'm not sure. But the thing is, my specimen, whatever variant this is, does not seem to want to take pollen. So if you guys know Owen on Instagram, growing plants, he's like the Wendley guy. He has like every Wendley known to man, and he has what he thinks is this. I did send him a piece of this, but he has one that he thinks is really similar because it's like very kind of on the shorter, wider side. It's really waxy, kind of glossy. And he says that his, I think he calls it Anton Valley, is I think where his plant came from. He says it's quite similar to this one. And that one doesn't accept pollen very well. And also when it does, it will take like a year to grow berries. And I think he has bred another, I might be wrong, but I think he has bred others that have a quicker gestation period. So I just don't know if this one is ever going to produce berries for me. I will keep trying. It was just a golden opportunity the last time I did it because I had pushed out 2 inflows that were kind of staggered. So they did line up. I pollinated one to the other. And then I think a few days after, that corkscrew inflow, it just went straight. It went limp, and then like the spadix just straightened out completely. It was like so bizarre. But if you like strap leaves, I think wen leaves and pallidiflorums are the nicest strap leaf pendant anthuriums to grow in ambient conditions. I am not a fan of Atarfolium. I've gotten rid of all of mine because I find them quite difficult to grow really nice leaves. I find their growth rate quite slow. Wenley and pallidiflorum are the ones for me. My Barac has gotten so sad, and I'm not 100% sure why. Ooh. Okay, well, I'm cutting you off. This is the newest leaf on it, and it is covered in spider mites. Look at that. Well, before I throw you in the garbage, I'm gonna spray so you can die in the garbage. That leaf was facing the wall, so I didn't even look at it. So this is not even the newest leaf. This is the second newest leaf on this plant. This is for some reason holding on. This is the leaf prior to that. I think it's time to go. Can you break off cleanly? Yep. Before I actually looked at that leaf that I just cut off, I kind of thought it wasn't expanding because it was just like stuck in that little tiny curled up size for so long. I was like, I think it's because it started to flower for the first time. So you can see here, I'll just pull it off now, the remnants of its first flower, the first flower that fully emerged and went through all the phases. So I just kind of like left it like that. I think the roots are fine. It's completely covered in algae. I do need to get it into a bigger pot. I just don't have a bigger pot right now. A couple of videos ago, I was like asking people for clear orchid pot options in like different countries so that when I get questions on like where to get them and they're located in the US or in Europe, I can send them somewhere. And then people were telling me that there's a 10 and 12 inch orchid pot. But I'm gonna need at least a 12-inch for this because there's a lot of stem. I got 2 Russo pot extenders on it as well. So this one I think needs a big Captain Jack spray down and a shower. It does okay in ambient conditions for me. For me, Rockwanium can grow absolutely fine in ambient conditions provided it has a huge root system. And when I got this into this pot a long time ago, it's been over a year, it was a snug fit. So this is a lot of roots. I would have repotted by now if I had the pot for it. But you can see this leaf, this grew in ambient conditions. When it did emerge, it has crystal a little bit on the tip here. When it did emerge, it did expand perfectly in ambient. You just need to make sure that you establish the root system like very strong and then move it into a water retentive enough substrate that it doesn't go through sharp dry wet cycles. In my experience, I've grown queens in moss, pond, soil, then tree fern soil. Soil and tree fern soil would be my go-to going forward for all queens. That's just my personal opinion. This one is one of my 2 Anthurium pallidiflorums. This one is my narrow form one. I think I imported this. Well, I didn't import it. I got it from a pop-up like maybe a year and a half ago. It's been growing really well. I don't really want it to grow that fast because the longer those straps become, the less space I have for it. Because when you're growing on a shelf like this, like when the straps become very numerous and very long, they start to cover other plants and you have to keep like elevating that pot higher and higher so they don't hit the floor. The newest leaf that I just put out is this one here. Let's see if I can get the whole thing in the frame. Starts right here. And that's how long it is. Definitely not the biggest specimen ever, but it's so easy going. Honestly, I'll probably just chop off some of the yellowing leaves just to kind of clean it up. I know it's not good for the plant, but it also is less leaves for me to spider mite treat. It will probably just look a little bit better. So let's just do it now. So like this leaf here, and probably this leaf here. I think that looks a little bit better. Okay, next up are 2 plants that I kind of effed up the leaves a little bit. So this next one is one I find not that easy. This one is what Tropicals is selling as Crystallinum Super Special. I always say super special now because Charmaine says super special. Silver Special. There's no super in the name. It's just Silver Special. It is insanely silver. I find the leaves are on the more like soft, pliable side. They're a little bit thinner. They can grow really dark and they can often have this like kind of grainy, pebbly texture. But overall, the silver is just so bold and so bright and sparkly. I'm absolutely in love with these, but it doesn't grow that well. And I think part of it is probably because the leaves are on the thin side. I think the roots aren't like super thick, juicy roots. They're more of the thin anthurium roots. So this one for me has grown way better in soil versus pond because, again, the dry wet cycles. This one I actually let completely dry out by accident because sometimes I still get fooled by the algae on the side of the pot. I'm like, oh, it has water. No, it's just dark because it has algae. So it was really dry, and then I just like watered. I like to water deeply because I don't like to water often. So I watered it as usual, very deeply, and then I believe it messed up this emergent leaf here. It was still really fresh at the time. You can see here where the cells have burst, it's almost like papery translucent, and the tip fully dried out and died. In looking back, I'm not really sure what I could have done differently because I had already let it completely dry out. I think maybe the best course of action would have been to like water it very lightly, or maybe only water the reservoir and let it slowly kind of take up from there rather than like completely saturate the pot and also leave a little bit of a reservoir, because that's what I did. It was disheartening because I was really looking forward to this new leaf. I really want this to get big because I love this plant a lot. If you are ever shopping tropicals, this is definitely a good one. I would recommend actually getting one in person or on a live sale where you can pick the exact specimen, because some of them aren't quite as silvery as others. And I'm pretty sure if you're going to get this plant, you're going to want as silvery as possible. So this is definitely not an easy one, but I think once it gets nice, it'll be worth the effort and the wait. This one was so sad because I was looking forward to this leaf too. Look at that. Pretty much the exact same thing happened. These two plants are sitting side by side, so they both completely dried out and they both got completely drowned with water. But this one is my mag hybrid, I want to say. I don't know what to call it. This is from Amanda, and it was sold to her as a mag from NSE, I think. But it's obviously not a pure mag because it has squarish petioles, but they're not a perfect square. And in general, the leaf just doesn't look like a pure mag. This was my favorite leaf, which is now starting to yellow, but this was my favorite leaf. I love the venation on it. It's kind of spidery. It's kind of like, when it was a nice leaf, it was really black and it reminded me of Bacarla. This is the most recent leaf that didn't get messed up. It's so pretty and it's flowering and I wanted to pollinate it. This leaf, I think, based on its width, would have been quite a nice upsize, but it got messed up on the tip. The roots seem healthy. I not that long ago moved it up a size in pots, so it hasn't fully filled it out. I did have plans to pollinate it. I still might. I'm not really sure. It would be cool to get like King of Spades on it, or maybe like Red Crystal Port. I can't say for sure if I had just lightly watered it or only wet the reservoir when it got fully dried out, would that have happened? I think I probably would need to pay closer attention to these plants in order to say like that's my experience. I can't say for sure, but I think if I had to do it all over again, that's what I would have done. Just water it very lightly and then water it again a couple days later. Okay, we're gonna take a brief break to let my camera cool down. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back and I gotta go way faster now because I've been filming for way too long and I have a meeting and Jing's coming over. Okay, so this one is growing in my living room. This is Red Crystal Port from Amanda. This used to live in my tent and it was transitioned out because it got too big. And it has been doing okay. Actually, this leaf was the first leaf in ambient and it formed pretty well. I'm pretty sure this leaf ripped itself coming out of the sheath, and it also got a little bit crispy because I let this thing completely dry out all the time. I am the least on top watering in my living room, but it has grown this leaf since and hopefully it expands okay. When this leaf came out, it was fully dry. Like 100% dry. And I was like, oh crap, maybe it's not gonna grow okay, but it seems to have resumed expanding, so hopefully it'll be okay. Once this leaf grows out, I'm probably gonna have to prune some leaves because it's getting way too full down there. The plants are getting a little bit too big. It's just too leafy. They're all growing into each other. It's harder to treat for pests down there, and the pest that I'm dealing with in my living room is mealybugs. Fortunately, I'm not seeing mealybugs on this plant right now, but the less leaves I have, the easier it will be to treat. It also started flowering. There's a little inflow poking out of this one. It'll probably flower again on this leaf after, and this one also needs water. This is my other SP Silver Peru. I don't know why this plant was sold as SP Silver Peru. I have one that I showed in last week's video that actually looks like silver and like the other things that are sold as SP Silver Peru. This is not the same plant whatsoever. There's some similarities. The petiole is squared. It's kind of reddish, but this one is like a more dark red. There's no silver to be seen on it. It's very triangular. It had a very red sinus when I got it. It has hardened off pretty green, but there's still a bit of red. It's been really slow growing, but it seemed to have been okay in ambient conditions. I don't know if it came from ambient conditions. I got this from my friend Jessie. I thought it was such a cool looking plant, but I haven't grown a leaf. And I've had this for like over 6 months probably, but it seems to be pushing something finally out of this little caterpillar here. So we'll see. It's been really low maintenance otherwise. I'm growing it in tree fern soil. It's in a cover pot, so I try to keep a reservoir when possible because I'm really not on top of watering in my living room. But this one's quite interesting. Again, I don't know what exactly it is because even as far as SP Silver Peru goes, this is not that same plant. This is one of my newer acquisitions. This is Ace of Spades crossed with BVEP. This one came from Amanda very recently. This is a top cutting, if you can even call that. It was like the majority of the plant. She just took a tiny butt cut for herself, but this is one of one that she has. It's not her hybrid, but it's so beautiful. It looks so much like Ace of Spades, just a little bit more pillowy and a little bit darker. It doesn't right now have that red sinus that Ace of Spades has, but I don't know if new leaves have it. I haven't grown a leaf. I put it into tree fern soil when I got it. I don't really see root growth, but I can see that the existing roots on it are still fine, and it's living right here in the corner. Amanda had been growing it in ambient conditions, so it was already used to it. So we'll see how it goes. I just love this plant. Despite this little hole, my plants get this too in ambient conditions. Amanda grows like 95% of her plants in ambient conditions. So she's definitely better at it than I am. And even Amanda will every now and then get a hole in her leaves. It also got a little bit scuffed in shipping because it's such a big plant and it was a huge box of plants that came up here. But despite the cosmetic damage, you can see how beautiful this plant is. So I am ecstatic to have it, and I'm so excited to grow my own leaf from this plant. Okay, so the rest of the plants, I'm going to turn the camera around because it'll be much easier because some of these plants are way too big to be moved. Okay, so this is the shelf where I grow the majority of my larger anthuriums because it has the highest shelf clearance. There are just 2 Barina bars up here. It'll get some light from my Soltec, which is up here in the ceiling. Some plants nearer to the front, like this one for sure, and some plants like this will get some light from the Soltec, but the majority of it will be from these Barina, so it's not a lot of light. This one was a plant that I got from Lauren a while ago, and it's just been one of my favorites. It's like very classic. I just call it Indom. It's just kind of like a run-of-the-mill Magnificum hybrid, but I love it. It's very veiny, it's very round. This is a fresh leaf, so you can kind of see that it's still soft, so it hasn't fully hardened yet, but the fully hardened leaves are very dark. So this was the parent plant to one of my hybrids. Not a super special hybrid, but this is one of them. This is my Indomag Forgetti Silver. So the mother was this plant and the Poland parent was this plant. So it did take after mom quite a bit, but the blackness I think came from both parents and it's starting to fuse that sinus. It's very cute. It's still in like the really old soil with moss top dressing from the shop. I haven't repotted it. I don't have a pot big enough for it. I think eventually I'll have to get it into like a not clear pot, maybe one of those like big Elho pots, and I just won't be able to see the roots, which, you know, it's pretty normal, but I'm so accustomed to clear pots. But I'm just gonna have to trust that the roots are okay because I do think it will be happier in a much bigger pot. But it's always really fun when a new leaf pops out because they are so massive, and it's just so fun to see something go from like this big to like I don't know if you can see how big this leaf is. It's quite massive. I'm going to do this plant first so I can get it out of the way. This is my dark forgetti. It's covered in pollen. I need to give this one a little bit of a shower. This is the newest leaf and it does have spider mite damage on it. You can definitely see it here. As far as dark forgettis go, it's not that dark. I definitely think they're better specimens. I do struggle to get this one quite dark, but I do love the really bumpy texture. But I am so happy to finally have that dark forgetti specimen that I showed in last week's video, the one I got from my friend Erin, because that one is so dark and so bumpy and it's the dark forgetti of my dreams. But this one has been with me since 2020 and I love her. She's currently pollinated. So she was pollinated with tofu. So last time we did tofu forgetti, and this time we're doing forgetti tofu, and forgetti is more fertile than tofu, so we're going to have a lot of seedlings from this one. And then this one is another what I call the darkish forgetti. When I got it from Ecogenera, it was like fully dark. There was no silver whatsoever, but over time a bit more silver showed up. But in saying that, none of the dark forgetti I've seen have absolutely no silver. But yeah, this one is pollinated. What is it? Dark Phoenix. So this one has Dark Phoenix pollen on it. I know Dark Phoenix forgetti hybrids already exist out there, but I personally wanted to see it happen. And this is the only thing I have pollinated with Dark Phoenix right now, because as you saw from last week's episode, I keep breaking the inflows. This is like forgetti town. This one is my forgetti hybrid. So this is darkish forgetti. So that one you just saw earlier, pollinated with my friend's dark forgetti. So imagine it's like these two together. Not really. This was the mom and the dad was my friend's dark forgetti, which I think is actually darker than this one. So this is the only one I have left from that batch. I have another prop, I think, but this is my specimen and it's just popped a new leaf. And this is like the moment of truth sometimes. I just check for speckles. This one seems so far spider mite free. This one has been pollinated with PAP RA5 and it did take, but this was done when May 25th, so it's only been a few weeks. But forgetti take about like 3 to 4 months to produce berries, so not very long time. And this will be the first time that I use one of my babies to make seeds, I think. Is it? Possibly. I might be lying. This one right here in the middle is Mag Ace? Yes, Mag Ace. I might have to turn off this light to show the plants a bit better. Is this better? Kind of. I grew this one from a seed a few years ago. I can't even remember how long ago. Maybe it was like 3 years ago or something. I had 2 specimens from this seed batch. I bought 2 seeds at once and I kept this one. I sold the other one because when this one was younger, it looked a lot more like Ace of Spades. But then as it got bigger, it was getting more green. So now this is what it looks like. I did pollinate it, but I think it didn't take because as you can see, the spadix is turning orange up at the top, and that's kind of what happens when the inflow doesn't take. The color on the spadix will change according to the species, so I'm not going to write it off completely, but I'm pretty sure this didn't take because it does look like it's dying. The next thing that will often go is the peduncle will start to yellow. So far, the peduncle looks really healthy. It hasn't started yellowing yet, but as soon as you see yellowing here, that means it didn't take. But anyway, this one has been growing really well in ambient conditions. It has not skipped a beat. It used to grow in my tent and then I moved it into an exo, which has less humidity than my tent, but it has been growing nonstop here. It's growing in tree fern soil. It's got a lot of roots, and essentially, if you want to move a plant out from a greenhouse into ambient conditions, you want to make sure it has a lot of roots first. So the better the root system is, the sooner you're going to have nicely formed leaves, the better the growth rate is going to be. I mean, if you remember that crystallinum that I showed at the beginning with that really mangled leaf, that's a leaf that grew in ambient conditions with not a lot of roots because a lot of it dried out in pond and I moved it to tree fern soil. So I think tree fern soil is great for ambient growing. You'll have to deal with fungus gnats, but because it promotes such healthy roots, you will get leaves that are able to expand better in ambient conditions. This leaf grew in ambient conditions and it's so perfect. This one I actually chopped and then realized it wouldn't fit in my tent anymore because the growth pattern is a little bit wide. So I was like, okay, I'm going to just trust the tree fern soil and I'm going to move it right out here. It didn't go back into my tent, so it had lost a lot of the root system from being cut. And then I popped it into a nice big pot. So this is like the biggest clear pot that I have. And then I just prayed that it wouldn't decline. But the first leaf that grew out was so perfect. It's at the size now where it can get ace pox, because if you guys know about ace pox, I'm going to put a photo right here. This is Justin Jones's photo of what ace pox looks like. It looks like some sort of fungal infection that's systemic to the plant. So it just lives in the plant. And as the plant matures, it will start to grow this stuff. There's been people that say they have cured ace pox from their plant by using, I might be butchering this name, but phosphatyl AL. It's like an aluminum derived systemic fungicide. I don't even know that I can get that here, but if I could, or if I could get it from the States, I think it costs like $150 a bottle, and that would be US dollars. So I'm not 100% sure I want to invest that in this plant. But yeah, anyways, all that to say, I cut this plant and it rooted really well in tree fern soil. There's a bit of glare, so you won't be able to see all the roots, but in person you can kind of see a little bit more extending down into the leca layer. It did root really well in ambient conditions. This is one of my oldest anthuriums and it's so teeny tiny, it's so sad. This is Anthurium VTI narrow form. I've had this since 2020 and this is the newest leaf. It's so small. I don't know how Tyler does it. Tyler Russo plants. He has grown his plant probably in the same amount of time he's grown it to the size of one that would be in like a conservatory. I don't really know what this plant wants, but this one, it grows just fine in ambient conditions. This one also started to speed up for me in tree fern soil. So this is one of the first plants I grew in tree fern soil as well. So this has been in tree fern soil for like 2 years. It does grow really slow. As far as anthuriums grow, it probably is like one of my slowest growing ones, that and King of Spades. This is one of those classic anthuriums I think that everyone should have. And I like the narrow form way more than the regular form because you get the satisfaction of all the ribbing at a smaller size. Whereas with the regular form VTI, you do have to grow it bigger to kind of see the satisfying ribbing. Okay, this one is my Anthurium Queen of Hearts. I had repotted it a couple videos ago and I got 2 cuttings off of it. It hasn't really declined. This is the newest leaf. This leaf was already starting to go pink. I was suspecting that it was because there was cocoa coir in the substrate. It was either getting burned or it was getting kind of hungry because the cocoa coir was stealing all the nutrients. I wasn't really sure. It was kind of like some cocoa in the middle of the substrate and I had repotted it into a bigger pot, but I didn't take out the cocoa. So it was like cocoa coir at the core and then my tree fern soil on the outside. So it wasn't a lot, but I'll give you guys updates, you know, when it grows the next leaf. Hopefully from now on, it'll start to hold on to more leaves because I don't own anything that has quite this leaf color and the texture. And I love this plant so much and I just want it to be happy. And that, I believe, is everything. I might have missed a plant here and there. I have plants kind of dotted around my house and I might have forgotten 1 or 2. I hope some of those things were helpful for anyone who's like looking for best ways to grow anthuriums outside of a greenhouse in low humidity. I would say if you have the luxury of starting something in high humidity and get like a really robust root system and then moving it out, if you have that luxury to do that to multiple plants, and I know that's not always the case, but that would be like the step-by-step process that I would go by. I personally don't do it gradually when in terms of humidity drop. I would go like straight from tent to outside once it has the root system. Sometimes if you don't have the best root system and you move it outside, you'll just have to deal with the growing pains. So expect a few leaves that tear on the way out, that don't expand very well, it looks pretty wonky. And once it gets a really strong root system, it should be able to support really nice leaf formation. But make sure your plant's getting enough light so it has the energy to grow out a really strong root system. Don't let those plants dry out. If you can use a mycorrhizal inoculant and get those roots growing really strong, more drought tolerant, I think that could be a really big game changer for growing anthuriums in ambient conditions. But all that said, it is totally possible to grow massive, beautiful anthuriums in ambient conditions. I'm still learning myself. For a little while, I was growing the vast majority of my anthuriums in greenhouse conditions, but this past year I've grown a lot out here as they have gotten too big to grow inside of a greenhouse. But yeah, that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you're also having a really lovely, restful weekend. I love you so much and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah!